Sau stavareuga greutungiska, dels sau þreugi. The Valthungian Alphabet, Part 3. I'd like to start by talking about the non-alphabetic long vowels. As I mentioned in the previous video, there are 7 long vowels which are letters by their own right, but which are not considered to be part of the alphabet. In other words, if you're looking something up in the Valthungian dictionary, you'll find these letters alphabetized as double their short form. For example, the letter aimate is alphabetized as eja eja. Ade means egg. It is the long version of aska. It represents a long, unrounded, low back vowel, like the a in father, but held twice as long as aska. It is transliterated by the letter a with a macron to indicate length. The main visual difference between the 2 long vowels which occur as part of the alphabet and the so-called non-alphabetic long vowels is that the non-alphabet variants have a macron in the Valthungian script, as well as in transliteration, while the alphabetic long vowels only have a macron in their romanized forms. Atuto, octagon. Las, temple. It also means salmon, at least in the nominative, but that's got a different declension. So the plural of las, temple, is legus, but the plural of salmon is lasas. Pla, chore or task. Aimate means ant. Though it is written as the long version of eja, aimate is a diphthong which does not have a short equivalent phonologically. I'll talk a little bit more about the asymmetric vowel system in a minute. Just take comfort in the fact that English is way worse. Aimate is represented by the diphthong I, which is very similar to the Y in English by. It is transliterated by the letter E with a macron. Aidhus, character or manner. Haithia, bedroom. Nai, no. Is means ice. Is is the long version of igil. It represents a long, high, unrounded front vowel, like the double E in English C. It is transliterated by the letter I with a macron. Istran, iron. Threis, 3. Ni, not. Audla means estate. Though it is written as the long version of ore, audla, like aimate, is a diphthong which does not have a short equivalent. It represents the diphthong au, which is very similar to the OW in English how, but the onset is a little more open. It is transliterated by the letter O with a macron. Auraloge, clock. Skausla, demon. Tau, towards. It can also mean closed. Urus means aurochs. Urus is the long version of ungula. It represents a long, high, rounded back vowel, like the double O in room. It is transliterated by the letter U with a macron. Ukua, toad. Vluga, robbery. Thu, you. Eja means fortune. Not like the predra kind of fortune, which could be good or bad, but eja specifically means good fortune. Eja is the long version of þreugi. It represents a long, mid-rounded front vowel, like the EU in French chanteuse, or the umlauted O in German möhren. It is transliterated by an OE ligature with a macron, but due to some typological limitations, you may see this letter romanized as an O with a slash. It never occurs word finally. Erthis, desert. Bircha, beech tree. Göri, sadness. Üfti means what you're used to or what you've become accustomed to, and it is the long version of uncha. It represents a long, high, rounded front vowel, like the U in French vu, or the umlauted U in German Bühne. It is transliterated by the letter Y with a macron. It never occurs word finally. Üfchikus, good timing. Sytis, mild. Knushin, to kneel. That brings us to the end of the non-alphabetic letters. And combined with the second video that you've probably already seen, that is all of the letters you may encounter in the language or its romanization. The letters are just one piece of the puzzle, though. There are a few more subtle features I'd like to talk about. First, a pretty minor allophonic distinction that you'll notice. Noths, that's transliterated as N, is realized as eng, that is an NG sound, before the letters giva and kune, which is the case in most languages actually, and you might not even realize you're doing it. So for example, the verb for drinking is pronounced drinkna, not drinkna. To sing is singun, not singun. There's another minor note here, which is that in modern Valthungian, the voiced velar stop, that is the G, the giva, in this NG cluster, is not fully articulated before another nasal consonant. In other words, the present participle of go is pronounced gangnaths, not gangnaths. The first person plural of gather is klingma, not klingma. For that matter, most verbs whose roots end in ng, like gangna and klingna, have present participles, first and third person plurals, and infinitives that are pronounced in this manner. The combination hagla runia was originally a single phoneme in East Germanic, equivalent to the WH in English. It is arguable whether it is still a unique phoneme in Valthungian, but in any case, hagla, when it occurs before runia, which is usually romanized as HU, is pronounced as a velar fricative, that is, like a hua sound. Þreugi, from where. Hwausta, cough. Gehwichin, to threaten. I should mention that there's a bit of a wonky method of transliteration here. When any consonant is followed by runia in Valthungian, it is transcribed as U rather than W. This is purely a convention of romanization. However, in the Valthungian alphabet, it is and remains runia. In all, there are 7 consonants which can be followed by runia in an onset. Giva, as in agua, which is fresh water. And in case you're thinking that word is related to Spanish, it is, but not the way you think. It can also follow daj, as in duals, fool, and hagla, as I just mentioned, like hueuga, how much. It can follow thronus, as in thwagun, to wash, kune, as in quithna, to say, saugila, as in swistra, sister. And finally, runia can also follow tius, as in twathis, twice. As long as we're on the subject of runia, here's another peculiarity, which I briefly mentioned in the previous video. There are several words in Valthungian which begin with the combinations runia lagus or runia reda, that is, a WL or WR. The WR comes from the same root that gives us that same combination in English words like wrong or wrangle, but the W is not silent in Valthungian. It's not really a W either, though. It's pronounced more like a V, and it is transliterated as a V. So there are 3 ways now that runia can be transliterated. Vroth, word. Vlijin, to want. Vristus, wrist. As you've no doubt already noticed, there are some weird things that go on with vowels. Don't take it personally, though. Vowels are problematic in just about every language, and Valthungian is no exception. We've already talked about the 2 diphthongs, I and au, which are represented by the long vowels aimate and authla, but there are actually 2 other diphthongs which do not have their own letters, eu and öi. An interesting note for phonologists is that these 2 diphthongs actually have slightly lowered onsets, making them the only truly lax vowels in the language, though I'm pretty sure diphthongs don't count as lax anyway. Eu particularly is the result of the umlaut of an au diphthong that is not authla. More about that in a second. Þreugi, wrath. Strauth, sword. Euglix, each one. And then öi is the result of umlaut of authla. Möichin, to meet. Freuði, wisdom. Þreugi, to make someone laugh. There are also two other ways to spell the diphthong au. For historical reasons, it may sometimes be spelled as au, that is aska ungla, instead of o with a macron, that is audla, and very rarely it may even be spelled aska winia. Hauge, grass. Raugiths, a pea or small bean. Strau, weapon or instrument. You can see here that it's AW at the end of a word specifically. Finally, there's a weird sort of accidental diphthong that's only popped up in the last century or so. It's actually pronounced just like the EU diphthong we mentioned above. When the combination U, JU, that is Yair Ungula, occurs after the letter reda, it is pronounced like the diphthong EU rather than the cluster U. Reuthna, to redden or to blush. Trjugins, wooden. Brautna, to break. Another thing about vowels, which I just barely mentioned in passing, is that all vowels in Valthungian are tense. Many, or even most other Germanic languages have a contrast between lax and tense vowels, which corresponds roughly to vowel length. That is, short vowels are usually lax, while long vowels are usually tense. This is not the case in Valthungian. Short and long vowels have exactly the same vowel quality, their only difference is their length. When any word ends in two vowels, each vowel is pronounced separately. This isn't really anything to think about when reading or writing in Valthungian script, but in transliteration, where you have that consonant winia vowel transcription where winia is written as a U, this does become important, because when this occurs in word final position, it is always ungula, not winia. For example, the word for murderer is döthia, 3 syllables, not döthya. Ni is knio, not knyo, which is almost impossible to say anyway, although the dative of ni is knuga, as 2 syllables. Þreugi is the imperative of þreugi, to accuse. Brague is a horse, a mare. Uftua is the last part of night before dawn. This is a kind of neat word that doesn't exist in English anymore, although I theorize it would probably be something like out or oat. Oga braguo is an instant, literally the blink of an eye. In both the Valthungian script and its transliteration, when the primary stress of a word is not on the first syllable, it is indicated by an acute accent mark, though the Valthungian script sometimes uses a mark that looks a little more like a dot. There are some stylistic rules around these markings, and I won't go into all of them now, but the main rules are: the primary stressed vowel gets marked with an acute accent unless it is the first vowel in a word, because most words in Valthungian have initial stress. Unless it is long vowels can't be unstressed, so there's no need to mark it. Or unless it is one of the front rounded vowels, that is, röcha or uncha, since these cannot occur in an unstressed position. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I also wanted to explain a little bit about the asymmetric values for long and short vowels. That is, the alphabetic long vowels, eus and osus, are phonologically the long equivalents of eja and ore. But if you put a macron on eja and ore, you end up with aimate and audla, which are diphthongs that do not have short equivalents phonologically. The reason for this has to do with East Germanic phonological history, and particularly a stage of that language's development known as vowel tensing, which is how all vowels came to be tense in the first place. Vowel tensing shifted all the vowels a bit, and actually knocked a lot of the short vowels into sync with their long vowel equivalents, but it also raised the lower mid-vowels and caused them to click in place with the short vowels. The two East Germanic mid-high long vowels, meanwhile, got a little squeezed with the raising of the mid-low vowels, and having nowhere else to go, they gradually became the diphthongs they are today. So just to give you some historical examples of this, the Greutungian Gothic short e was more open, like So the word for earth in Gothic and Greutungi was ertha, which became Old Valthungian reda, and then Middle and Modern Valthungian reda. So there's not much difference between Old and Modern Valthungian, except that the e is slightly higher. Reda, reda. By the way, here's an interesting fact that nobody asked for. As you already know, reda, meaning earth, is the name of the Valthungian letter R, though it originally had a long vowel, reda, which meant ride. The name probably changed sometime during Middle Valthungian, but your guess is as good as mine why that happened. This mid-vowel tensing was the same with short O. It was originally more open and became slightly higher when Middle Valthungian vowel tensing took effect. For example, the Gothic and þreugi word for garden, or orchard, was orti, which became Old Valthungian roti, and then Middle Valthungian roti, so just a slight change in the vowel there, and then the modern Valthungian rote. The phonological long versions of these underwent very similar changes. For example, the þreugi word rewa, row, became Old Valthungian reuga, and then Middle and Modern Valthungian reuga. And the word for ship, which had no other sound changes at all for nearly 2,000 years, gradually went from nost to nost. Meanwhile, the long high vowels didn't change at all, and the short high vowels became tense. So, huila, while, literally doesn't change at all in pronunciation to modern huila, which means hour. Runa becomes modern runa, exactly the same. The vowel in bring tenses and becomes bring, and the vowel in months, mouth, tenses to munths. Finally, the two long mid-high vowels, Gothic and þreugi mena, moon, became Old Valthungian mena, where it started to diphthongize slightly, and then Middle Valthungian mina, and finally the modern version mina. Similarly, early stoma, substance, became stoma, stoma, and eventually the modern stauma. That's pretty much it for the orthographic and phonemic conventions. I had planned another short section where I talk about some minor phonetic and allophonic variations in modern Valthungian, but at this point, this has gone on long enough that I'm thoroughly bored of listening to me, so I'm sure you've probably clicked away by now. So, avramöitin. Bye!